Yeah. Your opinion, how this done? Kevin, you gotta get close to 50.
Probably more, actually, yeah.
So you're already, you're got.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our AMA. We're going to get started in just a few minutes.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm here now.
Hello, John. Sorry about that. Glad you
Yep,
got the
I'm
right
looking
link
down
now.
on
I think
the
we had
Zoom link. So
two links going there. Well, welcome.
yeah, I'm glad it worked out, and hopefully it was okay for everybody. So yeah, let's get into it, shall we?
Let's do it. I think there's still some folks joining, but I think we should kick it off. We're a few minutes after. So thanks everybody for joining us today. We have a really special guest for this AMA. So our guest today is Jon Miller, who's the CMO of Demandbase, a leading platform for account-based marketing, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, helping marketing and sales teams overcome disruptive data and technology fragmentation. Previously, Jon was the co-founder and CMO of Marketo, and also co-founder and CEO of Engagio, a B2B marketing engagement platform. Jon has over 2 decades of experience, not only building leading edge marketing technology companies, but also leading large scale efforts across various enterprises as well. So really appreciate your time today, Jon.
Yeah, thank you. Always fun to talk about AI.
So a couple of housekeeping rules. The chat is open. So if anybody hasn't submitted questions ahead of time and anything within the conversation sparks your interest, please just go and type in any questions you have within the chat. We'll make sure we can get them answered. And then we're going to kick it off with some of the things that people have submitted ahead of time. So I wanted to start the conversation with, you've been really at the forefront of MarTech advances for almost 20 years. How are you seeing the new wave of AI affect the go-to-market tooling stack holistically?
Well, first off, there's an awful lot of hype, about it today. But I think it starts by sort of, we should almost recognize that, actually AI is not a new thing, in the go-to-market stack, and that we've been using machine learning for years across, different use cases. Whether it's to score leads or accounts, to find accounts that are showing intent, to figure out what technologies, well, this is more, natural language processing, but figuring out what technologies companies are using, what's known as technographics, managing our advertising bids through DSPs and other kinds of ad platforms. even how we validate the data that we kind of collect. These are all areas where machine learning has been invaluable to help with the go-to-market. What's I think really new is the rise of generative AI, and that's sort of like got everybody so excited when ChatGPT released back in November, and like, oh my God, this is kind of it just made it so much more visible. I mean, like for example, like I think we all have almost started to take it for granted that Google Photos can like recognize images of people's faces, right? Like my kids at sleepaway camp in the old days, they'd load photos of sleepaway camp, and you had to play Where's Waldo, like searching through all the images to find a picture of your kid. Now it uses AI to just say, hey, we found a new picture of your kid. Here it is, right? So the point is, we've been using that for years. We've kind of gotten used to it, but for some reason, generative AI unlocked people's imaginations and said like, wow, we can kind of do things that we could never do before. In go-to-market, so far today, I think what people are mostly talking about is using it for content creation. And I think we've seen the results of a lot of pretty mediocre content, that's been created by it. And I think we're all learning, how do we actually use this tool to not create the content for us, but to aid us in creating content faster. So I think that's sort of where we are today. But the last thing I'll say before we get to the next question, I in some ways am more excited about how generative AI is going to help us, not in content creation, but to create better user interfaces for our applications.
Oh, interesting.
Chats or HubSpot already released something that they call ChatSpot, which is a UI for a CRM that you can just chat with. At Demandbase, let's say you want a list of all the accounts in your territory that show intent, and are sort of in market for your solutions, but that nobody has reached out to from sales for the last 2 weeks. Today, you go into our UI and our graphical user interface, and you build that list using Boolean logic. But what we're going to release soon is the ability just to go type that in. What do you want? Give me this list of accounts, and have it parse that natural language and return that for you. And I think those interfaces are going to unlock a whole new set of opportunities in go-to-market tech.
I could not agree more. And I had this conversation about a year ago, actually, about how somebody needed to do that for ZoomInfo, essentially. Because right now, the way that you create a list in ZoomInfo is extremely manual. You have to go and select all these different checkboxes. And there's a lot of not only work, but there's a learning curve to it. Whereas most people in their head know exactly what they're looking for, like you said. And so a chat interface just unlocks easier access to getting the solution or the, essentially the answer you want.
Totally.
If you're not speaking, if you don't mind going on mute, thank you. Question for you: where are you seeing it kind of being ready for prime time today? When it comes to this, could be either chat interfaces generating content or helping teams generating content, and where are you kind of seeing it fall down?
Well, where we all have seen it fall down is write me a blog post about X. Like just actually trying to create content, right? What it returns is just, it's passable, but it's boring, right? And that's not going to help anybody. I think where where the prime time usage is, I'm using this every day, and my team's starting to use this every day, is to actually lean into GPT as a transformer, not a creator.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, if you can give it something like, hey, here's an article, can you summarize this for me? Or like something I've been doing is like, turn this into a LinkedIn post. So rather than just sharing the article, I can kind of share the key takeaways from the article. It makes it for a better LinkedIn post, right? But here it's not writing something, it's transforming existing content, and that's what it's really, really good at, in my experience. I think there's a lot of hype in email creation. I mean, every, Gong and Outreach and Salesloft and every sales engagement tool have all released, kind of create the email, we'll write the email for you. And I think there's potential there, right? But, so is it ready for prime time? I'd say yes, if you can use it effectively, right? Because it's the value is if you can get better personalization faster. And that all depends on the quality of kind of, what you're actually able to put into it to get something out. Otherwise you're just going to end up with that same kind of, generic stuff.
One question on the email front. I've heard this talked about a few times is it becomes a party trick very quickly, meaning, the first time you get that hyper personalized email, you're like, wow, this is amazing. The 15th time you're not impressed anymore. And it becomes something where now all of a sudden you're already feeling like you're spammed with email. You just start ignoring it. What do you think happens with the evolution of hyper personalized email?
Here's what kind of comes to my mind is in the world of animation, there's this concept of lots of people have heard of called the uncanny valley. And what that is when you try to animate something that looks like a human, if you bless you, please go on mute. If you try to animate something that looks like a human, you can either do like a Pixar character, which is clearly cartoonish, and that's fine. Or like a full video of like a real human is fine. It's when you try to animate it and it's almost human-like, but not quite, that it's creepy. I think that's probably where we're at risk of falling with this kind of hyper personalization stuff, where, truly personalized by a human, fine, not personalized, okay, not fine, but not creepy. The question is, can we use the AI to get that personalization out of that uncanny valley? But if we fall,
I heard a funny story recently, actually. A friend of mine moved to Boston, but grew up in New York. And he hates Boston sports teams, but he's a big fan of New York sports teams. And he started getting outbound email sequence from, an automated SDR tool all about Boston sports. And he was like, this is the worst thing they could have sent me, despite it actually taking in relevant information. And so to your point of uncanny valley, it's also picking and choosing what elements we want to leverage and why, and understanding, is this the right thing to personalize on or not? And I think that has to be really specific to the individual too, and not generic to the universal.
Quality of the data in is, quality data in, quality output out. Crap data in, crap AI out.
You talked about some areas where you've kind of seen mediocre content, and it seems like the repurposing, we've been calling it repurposing content, which I completely agree. It's taking something that's been done mostly by a human and saying, make this for a native form factor. One of the other areas that a lot of people started capitalizing on really quickly was all SEO content. How do you think that's going to evolve over the next couple of years, just the SEO space in general?
Generally my point of view is that Google has more and probably smarter engineers than the rest of us do. And, trying to stay ahead, they're going to do a better job staying ahead of us than we are of them. And maybe that's a little bit too nihilistic, but in the end, SEO to me always just lands on what they tell us to do, which is just create some good, useful, valuable content. And that's what they want. They are going to make their algorithms better and better and better at optimizing for that. So, personally, that's where I always just lean, is just, produce quality stuff, and that'll win for SEO. Now, just to build off that though, I think there's just a tangent off of SEO that people are just starting to talk about, which is, as buyers, consumers, it'll start probably in the B2C world more than the B2B world, but we're going to start using autonomous agents more and more in our buying process, right? People are going to GPT and say, hey, I have 2 days in Paris, what should I do? And more and more use cases like that, hey, give me recommendations, where should I go, what should I do, what should I buy? And I can imagine that happening in B2B worlds too. I mean, I already, you can go to GPT and do this. I did this the other day. I said, who are the top ABM providers and what are the pros and cons? Make me a table. And it gave
How
me
did
one.
it do?
It was fine. It was a little, not as good as I would have probably done, but it, but it was a start, and ABM, or sorry, and so that technology is going to get better and better, where people are using these tools and these agents in the research and buying process. So I think there's a new discipline that's going to come around of, agent optimization or AI agent optimization, where, we're not how are we optimizing the Google algorithm, but how are we optimizing these other algorithms to try to deliver what we want it to do as opposed to other things. And then where are the ethical lines of of how far you can take that and what works.
It's an interesting thought too, because if you think about in the B2B world, how you typically buy a piece of software, there's a lot of steps that go into it. You have to go and do your research of what exists. You have to do your evaluation. You have to do your internal, criteria development, bringing in the stakeholders. And it feels like a lot of that can be done via an autonomous agent, or at least do a lot of the fact finding and kind of coming up with, here are the, to your point of pros and cons, or here are the different criteria you said you want to evaluate. And we've decided that these are the two you should consider. And that feels like it could speed up the process dramatically. And then there's also the flip side of how does a vendor take advantage of that? How do you optimize yourself for that type of world, if that's what's going to happen?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Have you seen, so somebody asked a question of, have you seen any autonomous agents already being deployed in industry today?
I haven't. I think it's, kind of something that's coming. I mean, if you, have you? I mean,
in the consumer world, yes, not on the B2B side.
Yeah. But like, I mean, when I think about Demandbase's roadmap, and we talk about wanting our platform to be a self-driving go-to-market, where, all the marketer has to do in our platform is say, what's your objective? Maximize pipeline subject to this budget constraint or something, and, all right, so start figuring out like what campaigns should we be running and what messaging and what segments, and like, that's a cool vision, as long as the marketer's hands are still close to the wheel to like change if you need to, but like let the self-driving engine do what it wants. Like there's, I think we're going to see it in B2B. It's just not there yet.
Oh, and Marketo?
I think. Unmute him. I think once the tools like Baby AGI and AutoGPT started coming out, where you could give it a meta task and it would chain all these different autonomous agents, it really opened people's minds up to what could be possible. And to your point of setting a goal of like, optimize for conversion for this segment or whatever, it will go and do all of the steps to figure out exactly what that means for your team. And I'm sure for the, short and medium term, there's going to be quite a bit of human in the loop. But even being able to take a lot of the non-human needed elements off of people's plates could be pretty powerful. Sean had asked a question earlier around what you think are the strategies or approaches that are going to be the most effective in leveraging AI, specifically for personalization and driving meaningful engagement and conversion rates for B2B marketing campaigns.
Well, if you start with this like vision of like it's a transformer, not a creator, here's one we're thinking about, building on. Again, I think the email automation stuff is going to be pretty generic and a dime a dozen, but we have seen a fair amount of success with our personalizing our display ads. But when I say personalizing our display ads, really what we've been doing is you stick the company's name in the ad. So hey, Dell, or Dell can improve ROI by X% using Demandbase, like whatever, like and getting that name in there, it does drive higher click rates, does drive better engagement. It's right on the border, sometimes a creepy or not, because like, well, how do you know I work at Dell? So is there an opportunity to take advantage of high quality information and use stable diffusion type of algorithms to create display ad imagery that is going to be more relevant, to that buyer, especially in a way that doesn't show off how much you know about them, but just uses what you know about them, to create that more compelling, relevant display ad image. So, that's where I think we can get potentially interesting. Especially if it sort of starts with something like, hey, here's my base ad, right? But they work in this industry, so can you change the ad slightly? The weather outside right now where they are is raining, so would you change the image slightly, accordingly? So, I mean, you can imagine there are things you can do. But yeah, in general, I'm going to stick with my theme of, transform, not create, and transform you, and then using a little bit of the high quality information, just to make it a little bit more relevant.
When it comes to specifically paid digital and ads, one of the challenges that I've seen people come across is the fact that you have certain targeting limits, meaning you need to have a certain number of people in any kind of targeting group. So to your point of Dell, maybe because Dell has 100,000 employees, you could go and do something targeting anybody that works at Dell. But have you seen any creative ways, or how do you think about trying to get even more granular when it comes to hyper personalization or really kind of small targeting for paid digital?
Something that we're spending a lot of time working on and thinking about is the concept of a buying group. So, in some ways, account-based marketing has rose out of the fact that leads are too narrow, right? And just, hey, one person coming to your site doesn't mean that a company the size of Dell is necessarily looking to buy anything, right? So we said, okay, well, we need something broader than leads, which are too narrow. And we started doing ABM, right? But the problem was ABM itself was too broad, especially for companies that sold more than one product. Because the account might be a customer, but that's for product number 1. But meanwhile, they're just a prospect for product numbers 2, 3, and 4. And you lose that richness of what's happening in the true buying process when all you look at is the account. So we think that buying groups are actually sort of the right object that we should be that B2B companies should be focusing on. It's kind of Goldilocks. It's not too broad. It's not too narrow. It's just right. So step 1 is, how can we get buying group based targeting and start personalizing at that level as opposed to at the account level? And I think step 2 there is, can we use machine learning to actually start to learn for product number 1, who are the typical members of that buying group? What are their personas? And start to identify at a particular company, well, these are the 6 people that match those personas that are typically part of the buying group for that product, and then use all that information, in our targeting. And that's where intent data can be super duper valuable too, because, if a company is showing intent for product 1, well, that's relevant to the buying group for product 1, not relevant to the people who might be part of the buying group for product 2, et cetera.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it feels like it should be doable, given if you have historical data on product 1 versus product 2, you should be able to use some basic machine learning to figure out what does that general parameters of a buying group look like, and then apply that to all future things in a somewhat autonomous way.
Yeah.
I had asked a question around intent data while we're on the topic, whether there's any new intent data that some of the generative AI models can unlock.
Well, I think, the question is, are we going to answer that question narrowly or broadly in terms of what intent is? So what do I mean by that? Most intent data today, is all coming from different vendors following the same basic algorithm. That same basic algorithm is, hey, there's a person on a page. Step 1, what company does that person work for? Step 2, what content is that page about? And now you say, oh, somebody from this company is showing interest in this topic, is reading an article about this topic. By itself, that's one little data point, doesn't tell you anything. But when you start to find patterns of that, That's where intent data comes from. Like, wow, there's a lot of people from this company suddenly reading about topics, articles about this topic. So that's the basic algorithm of intent data. The difference is, all the different vendors get their data by mining different data streams. So at Demandbase, we're mining the B2B bid stream. So we see almost 1 trillion ad impressions a month across everything from like New York Times to weather.com to B2B specific publications. And each one of those gives us a signal. Somebody from this company is on this page. Weather.com doesn't tell us very much, but other things do. And with 1 trillion data signals a month, you can start to find patterns. G2 gets theirs by mining their own website. Hey, somebody from this company is reading an article evaluating these kinds of vendors. Bombora gets it by mining the Madison Logic Content Syndication Network, and on and on and on. Everybody's mining these different data streams. So if you define intent data very specifically as this concept, what the industry calls it today, then no, I don't think AI is going to unlock any kind of new form, because it's the same basic algorithm. But if we interpret intent data more broadly, which is just like, hey, can we find information about what companies might be interested in purchasing? Then yeah, so here's an example of one that I think is pretty interesting. You can monitor, you can figure out what technologies the company is using by doing natural language processing and mining their job postings and resume databases. And you start to see what technologies this company is talking about, either people use or they want to hire people who have those skills. And you can start to see a pattern of like, hey, this company is using this technology and this technology. You do that on a big enough data set, you start to actually find patterns of how companies buy technology. Like in my space, you typically buy CRM first, then you buy marketing automation, and then you buy ABM, for example. And if you know those patterns and you know what technology somebody has, you can start to figure out what might be their next technology purchase. So that's another new kind of intent data, if you will, that machine learning can potentially help unlock. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to the question, but I thought some of the background made sense.
No, I think that was extremely helpful. And Kevin had kind of followed up about the resume databases. And so I think I know what you're talking about, but maybe you can expand a little bit upon how people are finding signal out of job postings and job listings and things like that.
Yeah, well, so the piece I'm referring to specifically is mining it to see technologies that are being talked about. And that, what we've done with it primarily is to create what's called technographic data. Because our customers want to know, for example, who's uses Snowflake versus other cloud databases. And then the only way to figure, you can't figure that out by looking at some JavaScript or tag on the website. You have to figure it out kind of in these like sneakier ways. It does make me think, back in the old days of Engagio, a woman on my team would manually, like on Saturday night while she's watching TV, be scouring LinkedIn for just job postings of who's posting about, ABM managers. The theory being that if they're posting about that, maybe they're interested in ABM and might be interested in our software. So I could imagine sort of doing some of that kind of stuff at scale as well. And just kind of seeing what we can learn. You can mine social media feeds, see what people are talking about. Any data stream you can get access to, I think does potentially allow you to kind of mine it for some kinds of information.
I think the only new, from my perspective, the new data that can be created. So I think you brought up some interesting things of expanding the definition of intent data, but new data that can be created can potentially just be coming from testing out way more things at a personalized scale. So essentially by doing more hyper personalization, by doing a lot more testing, now all of a sudden you're creating more data across different personas, companies, industries as to what is performing well. Even to your point before on the repurposing content, well, if you're, trying 100 things with the help of generative AI, now all of a sudden you know that For LinkedIn posts, if you were targeting this type of persona in this industry, this is like the type of content. This is the length of the content that actually is performing. And you start to get some interesting data that wasn't possible just because of the inability to scale that personalization before.
Yeah, and that's a great point and a great ad. It's kind of another area where we can, learn to take advantage of all the data that's out there.
One thing I wanted to shift into a little bit is team construction and how you think this either changes or doesn't in the age of generative AI, specifically for go-to-market teams.
I saw that question earlier. I'll be honest, my gut is that it's a little too early to really know the answer to that. It's funny, I was contemplating like, oh, maybe I need to, because I write these definitive guidebooks. I wrote the definitive guide to ABM. Sometimes I do that because it's a great way for me to learn about a topic. So I was like, oh, maybe I need to go write the definitive guide to AI and go to market. And in the end, I decided it's way too early. Anything I wrote is going to be outdated 6 months later. So that's a long way of sort of copying out from answering your question. The one thing that I am struck by when I think about this is a quote from Chris Penn, who says, AI isn't going to take your job, but other humans who are really good at using AI or better at you than using AI might take your job. And so again, I don't know what the org structure of the future looks like, but I know that every single marketer today needs to be investing time and energy to become proficient with these tools. And I don't see it, and I think the people on this call probably are, because these are the people who want to learn. It's the rest of the marketers out there who need to sort of just force themselves to be spending time with these tools.
I listened to a podcast recently that I think really nailed it. And this wasn't specific to go-to-market or marketing, but they were talking about how in the knowledge workspace, the people who are most negatively affected are actually middle management. You have the leaders who are typically trying to be forward thinking and trying to figure out how can I do more with less and adopt new tools. Then you have the more junior, this is a force multiplier for them and actually a way to catch up and, essentially execute a lot more. But then you have this middle management that's a little bit more stuck in their ways and a little bit like, flustered in trying to do a lot of things when it comes to the people side. And they don't necessarily see that same, catalyst to adopt this stuff. And I think that really resonated with me. I could see that being the area that you see go away, or not go away, but at least diminish a little bit.
It reminds me of something else I read recently, which is that, in a world where everybody has access to autonomous agents, everybody becomes a manager, right? And so it's almost the flip of what you're saying, right? Those junior people, are now managing the agents.
Exactly right. I could see that world happening sooner than we think. From a tooling perspective, or I guess what you have tested, aside from just using ChatGPT to, remix content or things like that, are there any other tools that you and your team have personally tried or evaluated? Anything that's, either worked and you've seen results, anything that you feel like isn't ready for prime time? I think people are curious to know what they should even be looking at and evaluating today.
Yeah. I'd love for folks on the call to maybe throw some of their own suggestions in the chat too, because I always want to learn.
Great.
On this. So we've used both Jasper and Writer as well on the content creation side. Frankly, I've had just as much or more success with ChatGPT for just the straight content creation. We've been using Midjourney for some image creation. More in the experimental stage. I personally haven't cracked the code on Midjourney prompt engineering because I can't get it to do something like literal,
or not include text that is like garbled everywhere.
For example, that too. So again, we're using that one, but I think that's one where I personally feel there's more to learn and haven't cracked the code. We've been playing a lot with GPT-4 and just various plugins that you can use. I think that's important to kind of be pushing the boundaries of what's available there. So some of the things that have been pretty interesting there are both like charting and analytics packages, where you can basically just give it a bunch of data and say, hey, mine this data and return insights for me, and that kind of thing. So I think that's a little bit more cutting edge, and I'm just starting to play there. But I think, again, all of us, need to be building those skills and all that. And I'll end up with, again, one place where I failed miserably. Maybe somebody has a better idea. Was I had a very complex spreadsheet exercise I wanted to do. And, what I wanted to be able to do is just like tell an AI what I wanted to happen on the spreadsheet and have it do it for me, and could not find any tool or any way to make that happen for me. So it probably exists, but I wasn't there yet. So
I haven't seen anything like that yet. I've seen a lot of companies going after accounting and finance applications that are really, really early. I think a lot of that is extreme Excel and spreadsheets, but I haven't seen anything that's ready for go time yet. I think on the image side, it's funny enough with Tofu, we actually had originally been starting on the imagery side, and we very quickly realized images just aren't ready yet for B2B. I have fallen on my face every time I've tried to create anything useful, not only in Midjourney, but in all the other models. I actually have a collage I made of all of my best fails, which is literally like my best attempts. But it's just, I actually put out kind of a request for a startup before. So if anybody hears about this, is somebody could go and scrape all of the ad library content on any of the platforms. So LinkedIn, Facebook, Google, and get all of the B2B, take, your 5,000 top enterprise companies, take every image from every ad they've launched in the last couple of years and train a smaller model just on that imagery. And now you have at least what B2B ad images look like. And I think from there, you should be able to create some stuff that at least kind of mimics what we're looking for when it comes to B2B imagery, because it's not there yet. Hopefully we'll get there though.
Some good thoughts on some tools in the thread. So thanks for those who've been suggesting some ideas.
Agreed. I've definitely played with Stable Diffusion. I don't know what Laura's is though, so I will check that out.
For example, so Auto GPT is just one that has come up 3 times in my conversations today. So I'm like, yep,
Yes.
That's one that I got to start learning more on. So.
Yes, and that really plays to your comment before around the autonomous agents.
Yep.
And I think that's really the vision there. So I think that'll be the next wave of what people are really trying to tackle with this kind of stuff. Are there any areas that you think people need to be cautious or worried about, especially when it comes to go-to-market teams and using generative AI? You talked about the mediocre content, but what else should people be worried about?
I mean, obviously the generic stuff. Where the hallucination and just getting something that's wrong. This happened to me the other day. There was a New York Times crossword question. What 7-letter word has a Q and has all 5 vowels? And so I was like, I don't know. I put it into ChatGPT and it came back with the word equator. So I'm like, great, moved on. It wasn't until the next day I realized there's no I in equator. But it just gave me that, and perfectly confidently said that was the answer. So, that's a very, very nit specific, example, but it does illustrate like we do have to watch for this stuff. And everybody, just really does need to be aware of it. There's a lot of concern in the community around loading proprietary information into these tools. I think the good news is, for most of us as marketers, we don't have to worry about that too much. If we're just putting like copy and messaging and things like that, we're not, unless you work at Apple and like you can't leak the name of like the next product or something like that. That one's not the worry as much. And then obviously, bias, and just again, I think something to watch for. But really, I think all of that is just very, very small versus just the risk of crappy content. So, yes, watch for all those things, but yeah, exactly.
On the crappy content piece, where do you think the line is, or the trade-off is? Like, one of the things I keep hearing from marketing leaders right now is everyone is trying to do more with less. It's, less team size or headcount, it's diminished budget, it's less tools. There feels to me like a kind of nice tension between leveraging generative AI to help, not to create all the content, to help create content, but also still needing the human to go and clean it up and make sure it's good. But also you don't want them to spend the same amount of time they would have spent writing something from scratch, just cleaning up content. So I guess, where do you think the line is between good enough and, perfect when it comes to leveraging some of these tools?
In my experience, when you can use it as a transformer, is you get above the good enough line. When like example, I have taken, some stuff that I've written, like just raw, crappy, free form thoughts, bullet points, outline, whatever, put that into GPT and said, turn this into something, relevant, and put the resulting output through a GPT detector, and it says human written.
Interesting.
Because I think I've given it a lot of stuff to work with.
Yeah.
By the way, I did another hack that I did here is I started by giving it 8 articles I'd written. And I said, analyze these articles for my tone and voice. And then it sort of said, here's your tone and voice. And it said, okay, now take this crap and write that in my tone and voice. So that was the other piece that sort of maybe helped it to come back and not be, hit the sort of, non-AI written, component. But that's sort of the point I'm sort of saying is like, I think, you're giving it something to work with, and therefore it creates higher quality. I just saw thread come through on the thread there. No, it does not mean accurate or anything. It just means that the word choice, is not hitting their signal of like, the common words that GPT tends to put next to each other. Which is one of the ways that they're detecting what's GPT written.
Question for you, and this is more of a selfish, naive question. When you say you fed it 8 articles, every time I've tried to do anything even remotely long, it essentially runs into like, you can't, can't submit more than this text. And it doesn't know how to, if you just put in a URL, it doesn't know how to access that. So when you say that, what does that tactically mean? Like, how did you actually do that?
That was tactically using GPT-4 on the paid version, which lets you have much longer inputs, and using an extension that lets it access URLs.
Cool. That is very helpful. Nice. Well, I think we have time for one last question. Does anybody want to pop in and ask one last question or type it in the chat? Otherwise, I will.
I just appreciate everybody in the chat kind of throwing in their ideas. I mean, we're all learning here. This is so very much on the moving fast. So I appreciate your thoughts as well as listening to mine.
We'll go with this one as the last one. How shouldn't marketers use GPT?
Well, as I said, don't be like, write me a blog post about X. I've seen people suggest prompts like, act like a marketing expert, come up with a strategy for a competitive plan or something. And like, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say you shouldn't do that. I just don't know if it's, if you're going to get something kind of all that useful there. Yeah, sorry, that's not the greatest answer in the world. I'll leave it at that.
Well, for what it's worth on that last piece,
don't create content from scratch.
Yeah, for what it's worth on that last piece, I've done a lot of prompt engineering of giving it different kind of initial settings, like setup. And to your point, it actually does not move the needle that much. What matters a lot more is giving it the really specific either language, brand voice, bullet points, the human things that are the creative and the strategic. That moves the needle way more than telling it you are a marketing leader at a company that sells X, Y, and Z. That kind of, you can do every permutation. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Jon, this has been awesome. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you for being extremely honest and open. We all know, very early, things are evolving faster than I've ever seen it. So I'm excited to do this again in, 6 to 12 months and see how things have changed.
Oh my gosh, we'll learn so much. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.